Uh, Dear Earthmates, today we are visiting Milan Richter, who lives in Bratislava, Slovakia, and he is a great poet, playwright, translator, organizer of festivals, bringing us together. And about 10 plus years ago, you invited me to Bratislava. I remember those days, wonderful. Thank you, dear Milan Richter, for being together. And what would you like to say to begin with?
Yeah, that I'm very glad to see you after several years. I think the last time we met, it was at a festival in Romania, somewhere
Yes.
in Romania, in what was the town? Now I cannot remember. Well, but John Diaconescu was arranging a huge festival, and we were invited to. Yeah. I've been thinking about our first visit in Istanbul when I was
on also. Yeah. Your book on Kafka, your play.
Yeah, but that was first. Before that, we met in at a Turkish Pen Center in Istanbul.
Yes.
And I read some of my poems in English for your colleagues and for you. And I was on my way to Northern Cyprus to attend a festival, and that must have been 2010 or 29, maybe 29 or 2010. And there I met also Matej Matevsky, great Macedonian poet who came later and received the Jansbeck Prize. And you attended the festival in Bratislava when Matej Matevsky attended it. Yes. And then we had, and you were so nice to first you wanted to translate my two theater plays on Franz Kafka, but then you couldn't for some reasons. So it was Mesut Chenol who translated.
Yes, Mesut Chenol translated them very well, and they were.
And this is the book.
Yes, Kafka. Kafka and Kafka, yes.
Yeah, it was published in Ankara with Didem Yildirim. Yeah, a publisher. And then that was 2014, and 1 year or maybe 2 years later, Mesut Chenol translated my thriller on the death of Marilyn Monroe.
Oh,
yes. The Unhappy Life of Marilyn Monroe.
Yes.
That was also translated by Mesut Chenol. I couldn't find the book here in my working studio. Okay. But still, this was the second translation, which we then celebrated in Istanbul.
Yes, and how did your love for literature and drama start when you go back to your early childhood?
Yes, actually, I was when I was a child, I was a kind of a wonder child, or how the miracle child. I was very, I could read and write when I was 5 years old, and so on, and count and so on. So I was like very clever as a child, and it passed away later. But that was the beginning, and that's why I read a lot. I read a lot as a young boy, and then later on, so I studied languages, German, English, and later also Scandinavian languages, Swedish, and also started writing some verses when I was 18, 19, The first, as you know, the first text I now use is just, to make you aware that this is a kind that you can write something, but then you have first to live on, and when you have experienced something in your life, tragic things, happy things, and so on, then you have the body, the core for writing. And this was also in my case. That was in the communist Czechoslovakia at that time, in the beginning of the 1970s. And it was not very easy to write on political issues, or maybe religious issues, or erotic issues. All these things were forbidden, I mean, political issues only saying yes to the Communist Party, what we didn't want to do. Nobody from my generation, but some of my colleagues, they found their way and so on. I did not. I wrote quite tragical poems, because my father had died when I was very young, and my father and my mother, as Jews, they experienced the Holocaust, and more than half of their families was gassed in the concentration camps, in the German death camps. So this was also my history, and in many of my poems, this topic, the Holocaust topic, is presented, is there, and with this tragic background, I had problems with the communist poetry mafia, as I call them. Even at that time, I was forbidden to publish for 10 years. Couldn't publish any of my books, poetry books. I could publish some translations, but only prose translations, not poetry. And so I had to wait until the Gorbachev time, until 87, when Gorbachev came to power. So it was easier, even in Czechoslovakia, to publish books, and it had also something to do with a communist pope, as I called him, who was a communist poetry pope, who was anti-Semitic very much, and he hated me and everything what I did, and he tried to forbid me everywhere, but not everywhere. He succeeded, because there were the editors in the publishing houses, in the literary magazines, and some of them, they said, "Oh, why not to publish you? These poems are okay. It's nothing about the Communist Party, so why not?" So some small things I could do, I could publish. But then I did a lot of translations, and prose translations, and then later, actually, I started as a poetry translator with a volume of poems by Emily Dickinson, 1983. And then later, 25 years later, I translated it, let's say so. I repaired my translations. Of course, everything what we are doing 25 years later, then we try to do it better than it was done when we were younger. So this was also my case. And so at the end of the 1980s, when the change came in Central Europe, from the communist parties, communist countries, to let's say capitalistic oriented countries, but at that time it was not so much capitalistic as it is today. So then I had some name already. 1989. Then I was sent, or well, I asked, and then I could travel to the United States as Fulbright research scholar, 1990. So 3 months after the Velvet Revolution, I traveled to Los Angeles and became a Fulbright research scholar at the UCLA, studying the Beat Generation and Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, their poetry, So I met Lawrence Ferlinghetti in San Francisco. I made an interview with him, and then later I met even Allen Ginsberg in New York. And in Amherst, I visited Amherst, and also the Amherst College, where there is a kind of archive, Emily Dickinson archive, and I visited her house and the cemetery, her grave at the cemetery. So these were very, strong things for me. Concerning America or United States, I even visited Robinson Jeffers, who was a poet whom I liked very much. So I and my wife, when we were on the way back from San Francisco to Los Angeles, so we made a stop at Carmel and visited the house half built by Robinson Jeffers. As you know, he also wanted to make her.
I've translated a poem by him.
Yeah.
By him.
Yeah. He was a very non-conventional poet. I think the American authorities didn't like him very much, but this is what happens. Even with another American female poet, Dennis Levertov, whom I liked very much, and I translated a lot of her verses. And she was also, against the war in Vietnam and so on. So these were this was my way out of or from Czechoslovakia, but mostly. Even in the 1980s, I was able to travel to Stockholm, to Sweden, invited by the Swedish Institute. And it had, it was very complicated in Czechoslovakia. You had to sign papers, ask for money at the bank, then go to the police and so on. So it took time, and then visa from the Swedish embassy. But still, I visited Sweden and the Swedish poets, mostly poets. In the 1980s, I met Arthur Lundqvist, who was a great poet and prose writer of the old generation, very non-conventional. I mean, also when it comes to the Swedes and so on, because he got the Stalin Prize, 1958. He got the Stalin Prize, so he was, hated even by the Swedes. But then they recognized his work, because he wrote almost 100 books and translated great poets and was a member of the Swedish Academy. And so thanks to him, the Hispanic writers got the Nobel Prize, Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Vicente Alessandre and several Spanish poets, Octavio Paz, for example, and so on. But then I met Thomas Tranströmer. 1983, he was only 52 years old, and not that well known, even in Sweden. He was not so well known. So I met him then several times, and Thomas then later received the Nobel Prize, 2011. But before that, he was the first a laureate of the Jansmek Prize. He received the Jansmek Prize already in 1998 when I arranged the World Congress of Poets in Bratislava. So Thomas attended it and he received the Jansmek Prize. So we are connected. You attended the Jansmek Festival and Thomas attended it. Then again, once more, he attended it twice, the Jansmek Festival, and got the Jansmek Prize. So this was Sweden. Then as a young student, I visited Norway. 1969. I was 21 years old, and then later I became head of the Slovak embassy in Norway in the year 1992 in Oslo. So that was a great thing for me to serve for Slovakia, for the independent Slovak Republic, as a first head of the embassy in Norway. And there I met wonderful people like Knut Ødegaard. Maybe you remember Knut Ødegaard, who also attended my festival, Jansmek Festival, several times. And I met several great writers there. Even I got the Bjørnson Prize, which is very important for us because Bjørnstjerne Bjørnson, also he was one of the first Nobel Prize winners, but he as an intellectual helped the small Slovak nation very much in the 1907 when and so on when the Slovak people were oppressed by the Hungarians. So Bjørnson was on our side, and the people remember him and his name until today. And I received the prize, the Bjørnson Prize in Norway. So and then later the Norwegian King Harald V knighted me. So he gave me the title Knight of the First Class of the Norwegian Royal Order of Merit. And I met him then at a private audience for 15 minutes later. So it was also something. I am not a royalist, but you know, sometimes we like meet like this.
Excuse me, I remember seeing him. He visited a pen meeting there, and my impression of him, the King of Norway, he was a very polite, gentle, quiet person. That was my impression.
Yeah. I think it was. Yeah, I think it was when we were when you attended the. Yeah, that was when you attended the festival, and we had a seminar on Bjørnson at the Bratislava castle. And the king came with his wife. There was, you know, the exhibition, Bjørnson exhibition, and he was there. Yeah, so these were some of my meetings and some translations that I made, but until now I counted it yesterday. So I translated altogether 93 books and theater plays. 93, yeah, and plus libretto of Richard Wagner's Lohengrin. Yeah. So yeah, so actually 94 pieces of work, and as a publisher, I published some 95 books. Yeah. So. Right. In 20 years, you know, and my poetry was published since well, then of course it opened for me after the Velvet Revolution. I could publish, and several publishing houses. Here, this is my latest book, which was published with a very one of the best and one of the greatest publishing houses in Slovakia. And these are the stories from the history of my family on the background of the 20th century. 20th century, which I call the severe, the brutal century, you know, the brutal century. So there are many stories. It's like Café Central in Vienna, a very famous cafe, where Leo Trotsky, Stalin, and Adolf Hitler meet, you know, in my poem, in one of my poems. And it was in February 1913, and they really went to this Café Central very, very often. So and two of them they met. So we know that Leo Trotsky was waiting for Stalin, who came with a Greek passport and so on. And this with Adolf Hitler. So they may have met, may not have met, but in my poem they meet, you know. So this is
very
this is
very great food for thinking and food for thought.
But there are also poems on Reinhard Heydrich and Joseph Goebbels, you know, those Nazi creators connected with my parents, you know, who experienced and went through those times, you know, and also then my private, you know, it goes from my grandparents and parents, and then me as a young boy, and you know, as a teenager, and my life stories and problems to publish and so on, and meeting great people in the world. So this was a kind of my story, you know. This year there should be another book of my verses to be published in summer, and it will be called the Barbarian Time. The Barbarian Time, because it seems like we live a time which is barbarian, which is, you know, in my country now, people who have governed it, who were, you know, on the top of the government and so on for the last 15 years, these were barbarians. These were almost gangsters, we can say, you know. So and it's the same in many countries.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So you know very well how it is in many countries of the world, and that's why I call it Barbarian Time. And I've been working on translation now. In these weeks, I've been translating the short stories of Franz Kafka. Yeah, yeah, because some 20 years ago, I translated his aphorisms and very short stories. But now the great things like Metamorphosis, you know, and the great stories, which are also, when it comes to the details, and when you translate, you know, then you know the details, because you go deep into the language of the text. Then you see how Kafka worked, you know, and it's not very easy to translate it. You must also, but I have a kind of experience of almost 50 years of translating, so it's very useful.
Yeah, Kafka is lucky, and so are many more readers. In Prague, a few years ago, when my wife Füsun and I visited Prague, we also visited the Kafka Museum, and that impressed us very much. A wonderful museum, you know, concise, a small place, suitable to the spirit of Kafka, actually. Very striking, very striking. By the way, linguistically, how different are the Slovak language and the Czech language, or are they related?
Yes, the languages are quite, maybe the difference is like between Spanish and Portuguese. Spanish and Portuguese, or Swedish and Norwegian, you know, because we have, let's say, 70% of the words are common. Maybe they are a little bit differently written there and there, but 70%. Then 10% are a little bit changed, and 20% are different, you know, very different. So our young, like I have a grandson, he's 6 years old. If I told him something in Czech, some words he would not understand, of course, you know. But we can communicate very well with the Czechs, you know. And when I was younger, we also like to communicate with the Czech ladies, you know, with the girls and women, because the language was very exotic for us. And for them, we were exotic for them, you know. So then things happened like that. I had a big love affair when I was already married. I was 30 years old, you know, and I met a girl. She was a reciter of poetry, so she knew a lot about poetry and so on. And because of her, I got divorced and so on. So things happened, but then she went, you know, and then I met a Slovak young lady, married her, and I have 2 daughters with her.
How about becoming a father and then grandfather?
Yeah, well,
how did they influence you, those transitions?
Well, when I was father, that was the time when I was forbidden to publish. Well, when they were born and when they were like 4, 5, 6 years old. And I was at that time freelance translator, sitting here at a computer and working, translating novels from German and from English and from Swedish. And they, you know, had to obey. The doors were closed, and my wife told to the girls, "Do not disturb your father. He is working, and thanks to his working, we will get money and so on." And then I worked on a typewriting machine at that time, you know. And then I just heard that the door is opening a little bit, and then they came, you know. So, and that was fantastic, you know, to see them coming and watching what is our father doing here, you know.
Mysterious.
Yeah, curious, and so on. So, okay, so then later, when they were 10 years old, 13 years old, we were in Norway. I was as a diplomat, so they came. They have been there with us and had to go to school. And we said they must go to the British International School to learn English very well. My wife and me, we studied English, linguistics, and literatures at the university. But as you can hear, it's not perfect. It's it's called okay. It's yeah, to be it's okay for conversation. So they went to the British international school, learned English very well, and now and then later the older daughter Katarina, she became a radio journalist for the Slovak, how was it called? Radio International Slovakia. So broadcasting in English on the Slovak topics. Now she has a private company and is on her own. And the younger daughter, Daniela, she wanted to go and have an academic career. So she studied at King's College and University in Warwick and so on. And now she is associate professor at King's College in London. Yeah. Teaching political topics, you know. So this is what they learned. Their English is perfect because they learned it when they were small kids.
Yes. How about becoming a granddad?
Yeah,
how did that influence you?
Complicated for me because my six kids are in America. My son from the first marriage, so he went to the United States when he was 12 years old with his mother, and then he studied medicine and became a medical doctor and married, and they have 6 children.
Wow.
And I have here only the photos, you know,
yeah.
and with their father, from time to time, we exchange emails and so, but I have not visited them yet. And for them, they say it's very complicated with 6. The oldest is 13 years old and the youngest is 5 years old, you know. So he cannot take 6 kids like this and visit Slovakia. So it's complicated.
Yes.
And then I have from my older daughter, Katarina, Jacob is his name. The day before yesterday, I went with him to a theater, you know, it was a children's story, and he liked it very much. He's 6 years old, and he's very clever and many questions and so on, and he likes it. He, you know, many books and paintings and so it's very nice. But nowadays I don't know how it is in the United States or even in Turkey, but in Slovakia, our children who are 35 to 40 years old, they like to they like to command everything. I mean, the life, the husbands mostly when it's possible, and the children. So they do not let you as a grandfather to be involved very much. Only what they want is okay for the grandchild. So then they said, okay, grandfather, you can go to the theater, you can have a walk with Jacob, and so on. So it's a little bit complicated. It was not. I have not experienced it with my grandmama or grandfather because from my mother's side they were gassed, they were murdered in Auschwitz, and from the father's side, his father was he died before the World War. And my grandmother, Josephine Deutsch, I have a poem about her, a big poem. So she was mentally ill already when I was like 3-4 years old. So it was almost no contact with her. So I did not experience it, you know. But this is life, you know. You cannot have everything you want, you know. But yeah.
True. We have about 2 minutes left, unfortunately. I asked this to all my friends as my last question. What would you recommend or suggest to young Earthmates all around our planet?
Yeah, to be aware that this is the only planet we have. This is the only life. There's one life. No repetition, no possibility, you know, to make it again. And you must do the best, not only for you, like the young generation, but also for your neighbors, for your family, for the country, and for the planet. So what you take from nature or from the planet, you have to give it back in some way, When you are artist or, you know, when you are writer, so at least you write something which will endure and which will enjoy the next generations. When you are a gardener, so then you have a beautiful garden which will be there also for next generation. So and also this climate change and everything, you know, we have it here. It's January and it's not cold in Slovakia. There's no snow. It has not been for many years that we did not have snow. Now there's no snow, you know. So we must be also aware that the planet is very sensitive when it comes to all those toxic things and negative things, and also our thinking and ideas. They mustn't be toxic. They must be clear and positive.
Yes, thank you so much. And we are together. And thank you for signing the Earth Civilization Project Declaration 10 years ago. And we'll go on together. Thank you so much, dear Milan Richter.
Tarık, my best regards to your wife and to your family.
Yeah, thanks. We're together. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.